Well, hello everyone, and welcome to ACG's featured session, the Value-Added LP Family Office. My name is Orrin Winnick. I am the president of ACG Los Angeles. On behalf of my board and the Intergrowth Committee, I wanted to welcome everyone and thank you for participating. In my day job, I'm a partner and I'm part of the leadership of a multifamily office called Aspirian. Today we're at $15 billion and work with some of the top CEOs and founders in North America, and we are just thrilled to be part of Intergrowth. Well, today I get the honor of introducing these three panelists on a topic that directly impacts how GPs, LPs, and family offices all can work together most effectively. These expert panelists will offer up some key strategies on how LPs and family offices can add the value to their GP relationships and how GPs can get the most out of those relationships as well. All right, so here they are. Katherine is in the center. Katherine Ritchie, CEO, founder of Private Capital Investments, LLC. Katherine founded Private Capital Investments while she was working in Geneva in 2009 when she realized there was a need for personal investment services for family offices beyond typical brokers, bankers, or wealth managers. Whit Matthews. There's Whit. Whit is the Senior Investment Director at Aberdeen. Whit is responsible for all aspects of the investment process, including portfolio construction and the due diligence and ongoing monitoring of existing and prospective fund commitments, co-investments, secondaries. And then Morty Singer, last but not least, right here. Morty is the managing partner of Traub Capital Partners. Traub focuses on building value in consumer companies using its unique combination of investment, strategic, and operational expertise, as well as a cultural lead and engaged approach. These three panelists will offer insights from each other, unique roles in the industry, LP, family office, and GP. It should be an incredible 15 minutes, and I'll let them get started.
Thank you. Well, welcome everybody. I mean, the great disappointment of today, and we were just talking about it, is that Whit usually has on a bow tie, but he didn't wear it for us today. It's part of his brand, and I can't believe it.
I kind of forgot how to tie it in the last 24 months, so we'll see.
So we are going to do 3 2-on-1 interviews going down the line from different vantage points and perspectives. From the family office, from the sort of large LP fund of funds, and then from the GP from my perspective. And we'll start with Whit, and then go from there. So Whit, tell us a little bit about the background of Aberdeen, your approach, and the history of the firm.
Yeah, sure. Good morning. Thanks everybody for coming out. It's good to see everybody. So Aberdeen is a global asset management firm doing a little bit of everything in all corners of the globe. Our U.S. private equity program, despite that broad remit of the bigger firm, is actually quite niche and quite focused. So we consider ourselves lower middle market specialists. We raise a series of commingled vehicles that will do fund commitments, co-investments, and secondaries roughly every 2 years. So today we manage about $3 billion focused on that exclusive U.S. strategy. And I guess as it pertains to this panel, one of the things that's kind of unique about us and where we sit in the ecosystem is that we wear both that LP hat and that GP hat in terms of going out and raising third-party dollars and partnering with folks like Morty and the GP community. So we've been at this for a while. We've got lots of perspective in terms of relationships and how we work with folks, and we'll probably double-click on a little bit of that. But at the highest level, that's Aberdeen. We're lower middle market specialists.
So Aberdeen has been at this for a long time. Can you talk about the size of the program and also how you leverage your relationships in order to maximize those with GPs?
Yeah. So I mentioned the $3 billion of AUM, so that's predominantly across 9 commingled vehicles. So we're on our Fund 9 today. So if you look back through the entirety of the program, and maybe some of this was in the bio, we've made over 150 fund commitments. And when you think about that on a look-through basis, inclusive of the co-investment activity we've done, we've invested in over 2,000 portfolio companies. So as you guys can imagine, there's just a lot of exposure as we look through that portfolio, both in terms of GP strategy, in terms of end markets, in terms of sectors. So we've got pretty good perspective. It's not to say that we're experts in all of those niches, but it's not hard for us to kind of developed some pattern recognition around investment opportunities. So if Morty brings us a deal in the consumer space or the food space, there's often other portfolio companies that we've either had in the portfolio or we've seen through other GPs that really help inform our view of that part of the ecosystem. And I think in terms of adding value and how we think about, how we can add value to relationships as an indirect investor. So to be clear, there's always a GP between us and our portfolio companies. It really is kind of it's connecting those various relationships. And so, there's one business that I kind of think of that we invested in the last 12 to 18 months. It's a waste collection business down in the Texas market. So that doesn't sound like a very sexy business. And you go, well, how can Aberdeen add value to that relationship? In another part of our portfolio in the technology space, we had a business that had invested in a route optimization software business exclusively for the waste space. So we were able to connect those GPs. We also invested in another portfolio company that was focused on driver recruitment, specifically in the CDL space. So we were able to kind of connect those folks. And so that's just a small kind of example of instances where we can kind of put together the pieces of the puzzle that are our broader network and hopefully add value to GPs at the end of the day.
Yeah, and so, but you're obviously, like us, we're very focused on a specific sector. You're focused on the lower middle market. So how do you feel that sort of differentiates you because of that focus?
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, and this is probably drinking a little bit of our own Kool-Aid, but the lower middle market is a big universe by count, right? There's lots of managers out there, whether they're traditional funded sponsors or more and more independent sponsors that are out there. So we've got a 12-person team that's focused on nothing but lower middle market investing, and some of our very best investors are LPs who have their own direct program, but they tend to just be operating in the larger part of the universe, right? So they're typically smaller teams. They typically don't have the dedicated resources towards this end of the market. And so when we think about how can we add value at the end of the day, it's really being experts in this market that's got a lot of opportunities, a lot of things you can do by count. We also I've got 3 of my partners come from the direct GP side of the world, and so I think that differentiates our thinking a little bit in terms of how we approach deals and how we go about underwriting investment opportunities.
So what about newer emerging managers? Could you tell us how you work with them and how you add value to those funds?
So by definition, because we're focused on this smaller end of the market, we do see a lot of first-time managers and first-time funds. They're rarely first-time investors, but first-time groups building institutional firms. And so by definition, we do a lot of that. If you look through our portfolios, it's a lot of funds, 1s, 2s, and 3s. It's a lot of sub 500, sub 750 of fund size. Folks often ask the question, right? How often are you investing in new manager relationships versus re-upping with existing relationships? And it's probably plus or minus 50% in any given vehicle that we'll invest across those 2 years. And as we say to GPs all the time, more often than not, it's not a performance issue. It tends to be, we see a lot of managers that will leverage their success at the smaller end of the market. They'll go out and they'll raise larger amounts of capital, and just by definition, they're moving up market a little bit for us. And so we're constantly kind of reevaluating our ecosystem, our manager relationships. And so we just spend a ton of time mining, first-time funds, groups that are spinning out of traditional GPs. The independent sponsor universe, I referenced this before, is a huge and growing part of the ecosystem, and we think it's a fascinating way to get to know folks, both for direct deal flow, right? There's a lot of really well-trained GPs with really specific sector expertise that are spinning out and doing interesting things, and some of those managers will go on over time to raise traditional institutional funds. To the specific question in terms of how we add value, right? We're on the LPAC of nearly every fund commitment that we make. We've seen a lot of folks do the first-time fund thing, and so we just try to be a resource kind of in all areas of firm building. So some of it's kind of very just systematic, right? What do we have to do from a compliance perspective? What do we have to do from a back office perspective? How should our LPAC work? All of those things, which aren't really sexy, but those are things that folks that are spinning out of more traditional shops probably haven't had to deal with, right? They've probably been a mid-level partner or a junior partner somewhere else, and they're dealing with those things for the first time. So we really try to kind of help folks along that journey. There's other things like ESG that's become, come to the forefront in a really big way of late. And, we're lucky that, Aberdeen, is a Eurocentric firm. ESG's been front of mind over in that part of the world for a long time. And so we've been able to leverage best practices there. We're trying to push that down to our GPs, right? It's early days. There's still a long way to go, especially in the lower middle market. But just gives you an idea of kind of some of the ways that we can work with our, relationships and really just bring the pattern recognition and the things we've seen to bear for first-time manager, earlier stage managers. So.
Thanks, Whit. You're off the hook now. so Katherine, tell us about Nottingham Spark and what exactly does NS do?
Certainly. Well, I'm so glad to be here, and I'm here luckily with co-founder John Spark, raise your hand, and my great colleague Joe Gefeller, Director of Investment. So as you can see up there, and what I love about being on this panel is we do have completely different perspectives, which makes it a lot of fun. But that just tells you about how diverse the private equity ecosystem is. So Nottingham Spark is from Cleveland, Ohio, started there 50 years ago. John and his partner John started the firm, and it's an industrial design innovation firm. So what does that mean? Well, over the course of 50 years, they have evolved into a 80-plus person shop where we have mechanical engineers, electrical, biomedical, but we've got machinists, prototypers, designers, but we also have market research people. So we have been the R&D, mostly the D, for a lot of Fortune 1000 companies over the years. Like, you probably recognize a lot of those brands. Nobody knows that we invented all the patents for them. We've created over 1,300 patents, almost 1,400 in 50 years. So a lot of companies have outsourced that to us. But why are we here with private equity is because there is a way to work with private equity in the same way. So we can work with companies either in the beginning stages when they're looking at a company and a deal in due diligence, or maybe you already own a company and you think, well, how can I innovate? How can I sell more product? So that's what Nottingham Spark does. And we also have a family office now. There's been some nice exits. So strategically and opportunistically, we will invest as well. But I can get into more of that.
Good stuff. So I guess maybe just double clicking on that a little bit. You've got a unique model. You've got really unique resources that you're bringing to bear. Can you just double click on how involved you're getting with your portfolio companies and
Great
how you're
question.
doing it?
I've worked for 8 single family offices over the course of my career, and a lot of them got involved in different ways. Some were completely passive, really arm's length, maybe a quarterly update, but you never really spoke to the manager. In this case, Nottingham Spark does fewer investments and projects. We say no a lot because we want to be incredibly involved, because we will be at the very beginning doing market research. Like, how should we innovate, and where's the white space here? Or let's look at the components. So we're not talking about software or services. We're talking about consumer products and industrial products and medical devices and health and wellness, food and beverage, packaging. But we want to get very involved. So we're not going to do 100 of these a year. We're going to look at 100 maybe, but see where's the real potential, because what we want to do is we want the innovation to have, really disruptive results. Mm-hmm. So when we're working with a portfolio company or a fund, that's what we're looking to do. So we're hands-on, we take board positions. We may find a deal and source a deal, but we're not necessarily leading the deal. We are in our lane of innovation. So that's what we want to focus on. And that's the fun part, but we are always partnering with other funds and companies. So we're doing this together.
So how does innovation show up and be important within private equity companies, portfolio companies? I mean, for example, we have one of our CEOs here today, Jared Constanti, Signature Brands, the Betty Crocker cake decorating business, and all kinds of other elements that go into the innovation in our labs and all the different things that we do. How do you show up within a private equity firm or a portfolio company and really sort of add the value?
That's a great question. So It could be in the due diligence process when you were looking to buy the company. We could say, let's look at the portfolio patent, or where's the white space, or are we marketing to the all of the people we could be? It could be packaging. Now, I'm not going to give away all the secrets because we charge a lot for that, but we could look at it and say, hey, packaging. Here's some great examples. A lot of women are doing DIY, do it yourself. Well, you go to a hardware store; those are marketed towards men, right? Well, we've worked on fantastic opportunities where Scott's fertilizer, well, I don't want to carry around a 50-pound bag of fertilizer, right? Well, we created products that were geared towards women. Women own 50% of the lawns in America. Why are we gearing the products towards men? We did that, amazing. We didn't change fertilizer, we changed packaging. Another example is like the paint can, Sherwin-Williams. Well, I don't know about you, but no one's redesigned the paint can in 150 years. So it was a woman in a focus group that said, well, what if I could screw top the paint and pour it like laundry detergent? Well, no one's thought of that. Again, we didn't reinvent paint, but there are times where we are reinventing things. So we will work closely and say, let's look at the company now, existing portfolio, where are the patents, where can we protect it, where's the white space, where can we go together? And the goal of this is so your exit is that much greater. You've added something disrupted, so you're blowing out your competitors, and when you go to sell that company, you have a real solid reason for a greater multiple.
Got it. You and I were chatting before about just kind of how big and how many people are at these intergrowth events, and how do you make kind of the best use of your time, effort, and energy. And we were sharing the anecdote of running around Orlando and trying to get from one 15-minute meeting to the next. And I know you guys referenced that you guys got a booth this year. I guess as you guys think about intergrowth from the seat you sit in, I guess what are the things that you're trying to accomplish? And I guess what do you want the audience to kind of take away from what you guys are up to?
Yeah, thanks for that question. We're really excited to be here. I am on the board of ACG New York, and I was also on the Intergrowth Committee, and I was excited to bring one of our founders and my colleague, because I knew that this is the place if you're going to go to one meeting all year, and we really want to make a name in private equity. We've worked a lot with Fortune 100, we've also worked with startups, but we have a few really good private equity relationships where we've actually invested in the deals as well, and that's what we're looking to do. And we don't need 100 of these relationships, but we want to find like-minded people. I mean, I was born in New York City and had a very Wall Street career, but I'd say this is a Main Street. We're more Main Street, and we're looking for funds and investors that are like-minded where we can do this innovation together. Not everybody's going to be interested or want it, but the ones that do, we just have really great long-term relationships where we'll do company after company together. So yeah, come by booth 213. We'll be there all day.
Good stuff. Morty, I think we're going to go over to you. I guess maybe if you could tell the group a little bit about Traub and what you guys are up to and how you approach the world. And you guys use this term kind of strategic private equity, and we've had conversations offline around your LP base and how you guys have gone about kind of building that. Can you just kind of double click on those 2 points a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So Traub Capital Partners was founded about 6 years ago, but it really was born out of a company that's about 30 years old, which was the Traub Consulting business, which was founded by the late Marvin Traub in 1991, I think. And today, the two businesses coexist, but the whole idea would be that we would show up as operators, that we would have the ability within our firm at multiple layers, which I'll sort of jump into in a second, to be able to not only identify, but once we have identified and hopefully purchased a company, that we can act as really one team, really go in and not really show up every 3 months for a board meeting down from Mount Olympus and have our rings kissed. The idea is for us to be there as one team, partners, colleagues, and to really be able to drive value, not quarter to quarter, but week to week. And so on any given Sunday, one of us, whether it's at the partner level or the operating partner level, really, is participating in some special project, not as a witness or a fly on the wall, but as a true colleague. And so if you unpack this notion of strategic private equity, I mean, there's really 4 buckets that comprise sort of what strategic means to us. And so the first one is the brand. So as I said, the brand's been around for 30 years. People know it, entrepreneurs know it, people who've been around the consumer industry know it, and it means something because ultimately the late Marvin Traub was someone who embodied this left and right brain approach to business, about how to deal with people and how to show up. The second layer of strategic private equity is the four partners. The four partners each have in their history direct operating experience, whether they're from the financial side of the ledger or from the commercial or optimization side of the ledger. They're also able to really be hands-on and be in the weeds. The third is our operating partners, which go from both sides of the house, because the consulting people are still there on the other side of the house. But we have our sort of bench of operating partners, like other firms, who are there too. And then the fourth and final, but no less important, in fact, I'd say the most important in some respects, because this is what this panel is about too, are our investors. And so those investors come in many different shapes and sizes. So obviously there's I would call it the macro, micro, and micro, if that's even a way of showing it. But the macro guys are the big fund of funds and the large single-family offices or multi-family offices. The second tier are the sort of smaller family offices who are very, very focused on one little area of the industry. And then we have a series of CEOs or executives or chairs of various companies from the space. And each of these different layers of LP have strategic value to our portfolio companies and really show up. And the idea of how to mine that is something that we're hugely intentional about, and I'll go into in a second, I think.
Yeah, all these groups that you work with, how do you leverage them to your advantage?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I use the word sort of intentionality, I guess, to try and really be proactive, because ultimately when you have a different kind of LP that has the ability, so from the macro perspective, if we go to our mutual friends at Sigler Guff, who are one of, if not, they are the anchor in our fund. They have hundreds of portfolio companies, they're in hundreds of GPs, and they're able to see the macro trends that are touching, whether it's inflation or the labor market. It's been very interesting to get their perspective. Then the other ones who are sort of Fortune 50 families who made their fortunes in the consumer industry, in a segment that is specific to one of our companies, they're able to tell us, look, we're seeing this in our operating company, and talk to this guy and he'll probably point you in the right direction in this market or this part of the space. And then the CEOs, funnily enough, I think they are the ones that actually want to dive in more than anybody. I mean, you ask a CEO a question who's also an LP, they may not be a very big LP because they are still running their companies, or they're sort of in the market still, or on their way up. But because they're in the trenches themselves, they're really absolutely able to show up with very valuable, sort of very tactical insight and the actions, relationships to boot. And so I think it's important to really try and identify what the different components are to who's in your fund, and then really going to try and mine it.
So Morty, as the traditional GP up on the stage here, I guess, and I'll put on my LP hat for a second here, as you reflect on your LP relationships to date, I guess, what would your advice be to the LPs in the audience here in terms of how best engage their GPs and potentially add value to kind of what you guys are doing on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so we invest in the consumer space. We are sort of maniacal about consumer insights across all of our companies. We care about how the consumer is moving around the world and what they are doing, what they're thinking about next. And it's really part of, mining insights. So we're very intentional about that for our businesses. So my advice to LPs would be, find someone within your company who is responsible for mining insights across all of your GPs and all of your co-investments, and to try and come up with a monthly or quarterly report, and be mindful about it, because there's so much data across the platforms, especially the big ones like yours, to be able to, and I think you already do a lot of this from our conversations, to be able to try and package it a little bit, so that as opposed to waiting for someone to call and say, what are you hearing about the supply chain, there's something that triggers those conversations, which I think is it's hard to do because life gets in the way, and you end up trying to go about your business, but trying to mine the insights is very key.
In our discussions previous to this, you had mentioned, your LPs are very important to you. So how, as a GP, do you mine the LP support?
So we have, we try to be intentional ourselves, and as you know, it's something you have to focus on. So we have, I think, 3 different buckets that we look at about how to run our businesses. And so one is commercialization, sort of the top line and where things are going and how to grow a business. The second is optimization, which is obvious in the word, but it's not just optimization of the organization, but it's optimization of every line item, including revenue, to make it more efficient. And then the third is corporate finance, just the plumbing of the financial system and of all the relationships we have. So we try and filter all of those different pieces of advice that we are seeking and proactively ask, well, this one's going to be more helpful in optimization, and this person might be more helpful in the finance side of the equation. And once we sort of give them a distinct mission that's not sort of vague, then inevitably they come back with some rather interesting ideas.
Yes. We are going to jump to Q&A, so if anybody has questions, get those in your mind, and we'll get mics around in a sec. I guess maybe a question for both of you, and I'll chime in as well. The world has obviously changed a lot since the last intergrowth occurred. And I guess I'm just interested in kind of change for the better. Are there things that you guys are doing differently? And if it relates specifically to LP relationships, I think even better. But just as you guys reflect on the last 24 months and kind of the path forward, are there 1 or 2 things that kind of come to mind that you think have actually changed for the better?
I'll go. I mean, I think that we have ultimately, we all lamented this idea of meeting people on Zoom at the beginning. We all thought, those of us who were raising funds for the first time, oh my God, the de facto was you couldn't raise a fund unless you met someone face to face. And then that sort of changed over time. And I think sort of the omni-channel nature of meeting LPs and being able to see people directly on Zoom and being able to do it in person on Zoom at conferences, there's been a sort of a hybridization of how we all show up and meet each other and see each other. And I think the LP community's willingness to embrace that, I think some people embrace it a little more and some a little less, but it's been, I think, really wonderful for us. We feel that we've actually met maybe as many, if not more people than we might otherwise have. And it's obviously convenient and for all of us to, keep moving on our Zooms.
You're just putting on the LP hat here for a second. I mean, I think your observations are spot on. I mean, I think as we think about the old model, right, it used to be get on a plane, go visit every LP you could in Boston and say hello, and maybe there'll be some interest from there, and then you're going to go do that again, you're going to do that again, and then we're going to get on a plane and we're going to see you guys in New York. And I think if we kind of reflect on where we are today, I think we've become ruthlessly efficient in terms of how we operate. So, it's really been flipped on its head, right? We can do a bunch of Zoom calls. We can get you in front of a bigger audience on those Zoom calls than we probably can live. And we've kind of flipped the whole process on its head, where when we're actually meeting live or we're coming to see you in New York, we're down to kind of the final strokes. And I think that's great for everybody in a lot of ways. And I think that change is certainly here to stay. Maybe as a follow-up question for both of you guys, in terms of how you interact with your portfolio companies, have you seen a similar shift in terms of being able to do more kind of remotely, or is that part of the relationship still more hands-on and in person?
Well, for us, because we work on physical devices, our office was open the whole time because we were considered essential because we work on medical devices, and we actually worked on some really important things during COVID. But there's no replacing human interaction. However, you're right. I think we all became more efficient about the due diligence process, or how serious someone is about innovation, or how serious someone is about really embarking on a process. Because when you decide to innovate a company, you need to be really serious. We have to get CEO level on board, because we're going to make decisions quickly. So relationships and meeting those people in person and even going out to dinner with them has always been our way to do it. Come up to Cleveland, let's meet, let's have dinner. Because then 3 months down the line, when you need to make rapid decisions, you have such a good relationship with that person. So it was harder to do when we didn't have as many meetings, but we did have protocols in place. Our office was open, people were masked. We still took meetings, but we took fewer meetings. But you're right, once you were in person, you knew you were pretty serious, because no one was getting on a plane just for exploration. So yeah, that changed for us. But in some cases, we worked with one family office that actually bought a company and sent us the prototype and said, this prototype is terrible, let's work on it together, and didn't even come. They just sent the device itself, which was kind of interesting. So, but I would say there's nothing that replaces human interaction, but there is a lot you can do in due diligence and get to know people without having to be in person.
So I'll say, I'll flip everything I said about the other, this other part of the Zoom things on our portfolio companies, because it's about really being day to day with people and building those relationships. And at the end of the day, the trust, and we really care about being trusted, so that when they are vulnerable with us, that I don't know how to do this, or I'm worried about this problem over there, and can you clear the path? Be the Air Force to our infantry. You cannot get that out of people, I think, by having a long-term relationship that's only on Zoom. So we have a little sort of catchphrase, which is the sort of the algebra of our culture, as it were, which is, positivity minus ego equals trust. And the only way, or the best way, for you to show positivity, to show that your ego is being left at the door, to get that trust, I think, is to be, over a long period of time, together with people. So traveling to them more often than not. And the more we travel, the more we are in front of our partners, our colleagues, the better, frankly. So it's great to raise money on Zoom. I think when it comes to the day-to-day with our companies, we try as much as possible to be with them.
I've got a question I'm interested in asking you both, which is, why are you here? Are you meeting brand new managers for the first time? Is that part of your interest? And same with you. Is it relationship building? What brought you to this event?
Yeah, from our perspective, it is relationship building, right? There's every relationship you could imagine in the room here, from traditional traditional GPs, LPs like ourselves, service providers. It's really just an incredibly kind of efficient use of 2 days. Selfishly, we were talking about this before. It's just great to see people in person. The number of relationships that have kicked off in the last 24 months, of whom I've never met in person until the last 24, 36 hours, has been terrific. So there's a lot to that. We as a team, and the U.S. private equity team at Aberdeen, are really focused on kind of keeping our brand out there. And so I'm lucky I've got 5 partners, and between the 6 of us, we really do try to get out there and make sure we're in front of the lower middle market private equity community broadly. So there's a bunch of boxes in there to check, but I think I give the folks at Intergrowth and ACG a big pat on the back. They do a terrific job of getting everybody together, and certainly after the last 24 months, kudos to them even the more.
Yeah, I would sort of echo that. For us, we had heard often that, if you're a low middle market private equity firm and you're not at ACG, then you're just not on the map. And the hub and spoke effect of being here, being able to meet, everyone from investment banks to LPs to lenders to sale leaseback people. There's just been the whole cadre of relationships that we use on a daily basis are here, and it's quite wonderful to do it in person.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why we're here, too, to meet people and get our name out there, because a lot of people don't know that maybe 10 to 15 products in your home or kitchen or bathroom or garage we actually made, and no one knows that. So we want to get to know this community better. And, yeah, really hands off to ACG. This has been really well organized, and it's so nice to be back in person and see everybody and see friends and somewhat back to normalcy.
There you go.
Absolutely.
So we've got a little more than 10 minutes left, and we wanted to make sure we left some time for Q&A, so maybe we'll pause here for a second and see if anybody has any questions. If not, Morty's going to come up with the next one.
Oh, here we go.
Do you have any examples about Nottingham Spark has been of great value for anybody in the private equity industry?
Well, thank you for feeding me that question, Joe. He's on my team. Let me tell you one. So here's a great example, which
Should've
is
traveled
fun.
with colleagues.
So yeah, exactly. Travel with colleagues. I told them no heckling. So here's a fun one. You know, we all have heard of hot tubs and jacuzzi. So this is a fun relationship. Joe Gefeller has known Invest Industrial for a long time. So Italian origins, Bonomi, Benetton family. They are in Milan. They have a New York office, and so they Invest Industrial, the name, right? So that fits with us. So for 2 years, we looked for a company to buy in the United States, and we ended up acquiring Jacuzzi. Now, a lot of people overlook Jacuzzi because, kind of like everyone hates them. They break, moldy covers, and they're kind of an old, stodgy, sleepy business. So that for us, though, is actually very exciting. Now, why? Because we looked at it and kind of literally tore them apart and realized, like, how are they manufactured? And what are the pain points? You know, when you solve a pain point, people will pay for it. So we ripped them apart and realized, wow, there are so many ways we can improve them. You know, there were, 300 different versions of them and 1,000 nozzles. Well, they all need nozzles. Why not have one? So streamline it. And in the short time we've owned it, we've already really innovated them. But if you're going to buy one, wait another year. We're not done yet. But self-cleaning and just all these things, the covers, there's just so many pain points. So to us, we're going to make an exciting new product that will look and feel completely different. So it's not that we're looking for distressed companies so much, even though we could work on them, but it's really, we're more looking for what is ripe for disruption. How can we get in there, make it better, and disrupt the industry when other people just kind of, hold these companies. I mean, I think sometimes when companies are owned by private equity, some of the creative people aren't there anymore, or they don't have engineers on staff. It makes sense, right? But that's what we do, and so we're looking for those kind of opportunities. So thanks for the question, Joe.
The layup.
Now, there was a gentleman behind you that had a question.
What role does local play in the principles when you look at your investments?
Yeah, so ILPA's been great, right? And I think they've been good for the market, and we're broad supporters of kind of everything they're doing. I would say at the lower end of the middle market where we play for first-time managers, emerging managers, they don't necessarily have the infrastructure in place on day one to meet all of the stated kind of ILPA goals and requirements. But we do directionally try to kind of hold folks kind of accountable to the regulations that they've put in place. So it's certainly kind of front of mind for us. You'll certainly see larger GPs that'll be sticking to the ILPA templates, et cetera, et cetera. I wouldn't say we're at the stage, certainly in the U.S. market, where we're holding kind of our lower middle market managers to that high standard, just because the reporting and just the lift that's involved to get that done is pretty onerous for some groups. So, directionally, we love what they're doing. We think it's great for the private equity ecosystem, broadly, and we encourage all of our GPs to kind of look to them for best practices. But again, there are some components of what they're doing that are just overly onerous for managers that, they may be lucky if they have a controller in place, right? If not, an outsourced kind of CFO type individual. Yeah.
John?
Maybe this is a question for all three of you. Describe where your deal flow comes from. How do you generate opportunities? And either, pass or move ahead on. Where do they come from?
So, I'm happy to kick that one off. So, I mentioned the 4 layers of our firm. The first one being the brand. We have a brand that is now 30 years old, and it's obviously evolved over time. But we do a lot of work on trying to put out, to maintain that brand, to maintain the notoriety of the way we do business, the left to right brain approach, sort of the genuflection, as it were, of the left to the right and the right to the left. And we sort of put white papers out and do all these kinds of things. But ultimately, because of that history, we see a huge amount of deals who come into the overall, or companies that come into the overall umbrella, as it were, and then many of them find their way to our side of the house. And I think what's wonderful about that is, I mean, case in point, the 3 companies that are on the screen there, they all came from that sort of proprietary deal sourcing of the brand, of the overarching umbrella, and it's obviously something that we're quite proud of. That said, we obviously look at all of the processes and try and stay well in the flow, and indeed, that's what we're doing here at ACG, is to make sure that every bank knows who we are. But it's been really helpful to try and very, very intentionally mine the deal flow ourselves through our brand and our partners.
Yeah, from Aberdeen's perspective, and I talked to our lower middle market focus, so we're sector agnostic. We're always looking for folks that have some type of sector expertise. So when we think about a deal from a co-investment perspective, right, we always kind of ask ourselves 2 questions, right? Why is the GP lucky enough to kind of win this deal, and what's their edge, and why are we, Aberdeen, lucky enough to get the look? And those are 2 important questions as we filter things down. We keep the top of the funnel incredibly wide, and so I mentioned I've got 5 partners. We're all out there. We're kind of wearing out the shoe leather. We're trying to build relationships, and so we try to keep that top of the funnel as wide as we can. I've talked to the independent sponsor universe. That universe is growing. We're seeing lots of deal flow from that. And then I think as it pertains to regular way GPs, where we may have the fund relationship or we may be a future fund partner, it's making sure they know what our focus is, i.e. lower middle market. They know where we potentially can add value to their portfolio, and it's just brand building. The Traub guys are lucky that they've been doing this for a really long time. Aberdeen as a brand is not incredibly well known in the U.S. lower middle market. We think we're doing a nice job of making sure the GP community knows who we are, but we've got to kind of keep doing that. We've got to work hard to do that. Yeah.
So, how important are co-investments rights?
Co-investment rights. So we don't have in any of our relationships kind of stated co-investment rights. So I want to just kind of double click on that word for a second. We are interested in co-invest. We think it's an important part of our program. It's a great way to double down on really interesting assets. We're never paying management fees on those co-investments. Anytime we're paying economics, it's only in an upside scenario. So from a blended return perspective, it's incredibly additive to what we're building in our fund portfolios. So it's an important part of what we do. We make sure our funded GPs kind of know that that's something that we're interested in. In the independent sponsor universe, we really leverage the GP kind of mindset of a handful of our partners to be able to help in the underwriting of those deals and getting to know. So it's an important part of our program. In any given portfolio, it's probably close to 40% of what we do. And so we think, if you guys look at, everybody knows this, but the fund of funds world has evolved a lot in the last 2 decades, right? If you went back to pre-GFC, it was go find a couple good GPs, allocate capital, don't worry about the J curve, come back and visit it in 7 or 10 years, and you'll get some private equity exposure. That model's evolved a ton. Aberdeen's not special in that evolution. When we think about our portfolios at Aberdeen, what we're really building at the end of the day is kind of a specialized small cap private equity portfolio. I've kind of touched on a couple ways that we're making decisions, but we don't think of ourselves strictly as fund-to-funds investors, so we will do co-investments, we'll do structured primaries, we'll do secondaries opportunistically, and so we really are kind of a go-anywhere kind of small-cap private equity investor. But it's an important part of the program, but we do not have co-investment rights. In some groups do, right, where there's a prescribed kind of allocation of co-investments.
I'll just add one thing to that. So from our perspective, we comprised our LP sort of platform based on their ability to do co-invest, because we hoped they would give us the ability to punch above our weight, particularly as a first-time fund. And so today we actually have, for every dollar invested by the fund, we have $1 of co-invest in the current portfolio companies that we have. So it's been hugely important to allow us to be more flexible and see more deals.
So when it comes to co-investing, really it's unique deal by deal. Because there's been a history of working with public companies, sometimes in those cases there wasn't an investment opportunity, but we could help create patents and get royalties from those. or things of those natures. So over time, if you see some of those brands like Little Tykes, there's been royalties for 40 years. So that can be a really great business model. But today, for example, the jacuzzi example, that took 2 years to find, and we're on the board, and we did write a check into that deal. So sometimes we will do, though, in-kind services, because some of these, prototyping and all of that can be very expensive. So we can do in-kind for equity, we can do royalties. So we're very flexible, so it depends on the deal, it depends on the size, it depends on a lot of things. So there's not like one, cookie cutter way that we approach it, and we just want to be good partners. So we're, open to discussion on how we work with each company and each fund, being an LP. But again, we're never passive. We're never just going to invest and hope things go well. We really want to work on these companies with our staff.
Anybody else? Okay, one last question for you guys. We've got 7-8 months left in the year. What are you most excited about for the rest of 2022?
I think going to more things like this. I've been grounded for so long, and I think it's, sometimes it's the spark of an idea. Just a conversation with someone. I ran into somebody yesterday I haven't seen in 2 years, and in 2 minutes we just, wait a minute, we should look at that together. I think that is fun, and I've missed that. Although, it's a double-edged sword, because I didn't mind so much not having to travel, but I like traveling. But I think that spark, that's what I'm looking for, is more of these, especially the ACG-focused events, because we do consumer, we do healthcare, we do, so to go to those really focused events, I'm excited about.
So I would say we just bought our third platform company, HITS, which is the largest equestrian events business in the United States. So just getting, no pun intended, to muck in and get going is something that we're all very excited about. And I think just in the last few minutes, maybe I'll sort of go back to you. You guys asked me what I would want to see from LPs. There are GPs in the room other than myself. So what's the one thing you'd say to GPs to leverage you guys better?
Well, what I always say to GPs is transparency, transparency, transparency. Like, I cannot overestimate or overcomment on how much just being transparent with us as LPs is. The number of times we've found things out the wrong way and the impact that has on a GP relationship is just my one biggest kind of sound piece of advice. In terms of leveraging us, I mean, some of it is just on the ask. I mean, I think you were right before, right? Could we be more systematic in terms of how we kind of go out to our GPs, for sure? But just ask, right? Like, some of these relationships. Have you seen this? Is there another GP that's doing this? Are there other portfolio companies kind of in the mid-market and the larger cap market that you guys know and have relationships to? So just ask. We need something. I mean, we've got a lot of resources. We've got a lot of portfolio companies. So just ask.
Indeed.
With us, I would say, we are an incredible pair of eyes to look at your portfolio companies or companies you're looking to acquire to see where the white space is. There's a great Harvard study talking about most people focus on, their core products, 20% on adjacent and 10% on transformational. But actually the highest ROI is complete opposite. If you spend 70% on transformational, that's where you're going to get the greatest exit. But it can be a little bit scary, but we like to build trust, and we have a 95% commercialization rate. We have over 1,300 patents. So we are good at that, which is we're not going to, it's not some fly-by-night idea. It's backed by a lot of research, and we listen to the voice of the customer. And so, that's what I would ask, that, come to us with your portfolio companies where you're like, there's something missing, because maybe we can help you find that and then make that great exit even greater.
Well, guys, thanks for showing up at 9 a.m. in Las Vegas. We didn't know who we'd get, so appreciate you guys all coming out. And Morty, Katherine, this has been a ton of fun.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.